Hello everyone, it's Karen at the Cool Tools Studio. Today I'm going to be using some of Wanaree Tanner's signature tools alongside Phoenix torch fireable clay to create a spinning pendant. This project combines metal clay and a little bit of metal smithing with a super simple solder connection. Here's what you need for this project. I need a clay board, a dish with some water and a brush, some sanding pads, a foam healing tool, a disposable applicator, a silicone tipped clay shaper, a medium sanding stick, an ultra clay pick, a set of tweezers, a tissue blade, and then today I'm working with a number 54 drill bit, which by the time the clay shrinks, the hole made from it will accommodate an 18 gauge wire. I have a hand drill and some drill bits, a wonder roller, cool slip, and a hot plate. Today I'm also working with Wanaree Tanner's signature hollow form system, and I'm using the bicone shape. I'm using the Nova pedal die cutting tool and handle and a tile. I also have a round dome finishing touches mold, Phoenix torch fireable clay and paste, some clay thickness rolling frames, and tape. So before I dive in and start manipulating my clay, I'm going to prep my hollow form system, and to do that, I'm going to take it out of the folder and just start bending it to kind of get it used to making those bends. And we're looking for a score side, and we're wanting to bend the scores to be facing up. So I'm kind of pre-bending this to prepare it to make the bends more readily and easily once it's attached to my clay. And the way that this system works is you roll your clay into a sheet, apply this, and then cut it to the form, and then use this to bend and manipulate your clay. So it'll go easier for you if you kind of pre-establish the bends in the shape. All right. So this is ready to go, but I'm going to be using this alongside some tape. So I'm going to go ahead and pull off a couple pieces of tape to have ready to go as well. And I feel like I also should say that Wanaree Tanner has a wonderful video on our YouTube as well, where she walks you through this process and creates a really beautiful bead. So if you're looking for more information on this process, please refer to her video as well. But I've got everything ready to go, so now I'm going to roll my clay to 3 cards thickness. As always, starting off with some cool slip. So Phoenix clay is a little more firm right out of the package than our other Cool Tools clays, so I just knead it really quickly before I start rolling. And then I'm trying to get it large enough to accommodate this template. So I'm going to go a little bit further this way, and then I'm going to rotate to stretch my clay in this direction as well. And try it on for size, and that'll be plenty. And when you're applying this hollow form system to your clay, you want the scores to be facing up. So I'm going to place it directly on my clay and then use a roller to kind of impress it on. And then at this point, I'm just picking it up really quick and moving to a tough card to protect my work surface as I cut. And I'm just using my needle to gently drag along these edges. With points like this, it's easier to start in the point and drag out than kind of pushing material into that corner if you were to cut from outside in. And then take away the excess to save that for another project. The tabs on this guide are used for folding and taping to create the form, so we actually want to remove the material from the tabs. And the easiest way to do that is to take a tissue blade and then look at it from this side and kind of line up on the edge there and then drag away. So for this one where it's kind of overlapping, I'll kind of actually sneak in on this side, line it up there, and then drag away. So once you've trimmed the clay off the tabs and exposed them, we're ready to start forming the shape. So I'm taking my clay off to save for another project. And at this point, I'm going to kind of pre-establish the bends in the clay, kind of coax a little bit of form into this flattened shape here. And now we're ready to begin taping. So with Phoenix in this system, I found that just water at this point is good for the connections. I did a couple, and one of them I tried paste in here, and I just had a lot more cleanup with the one where I applied paste because it kind of squished out and made a bit of a mess. So for this point, I'm just using water, and I'm bringing this shape up and then this red tab over. Kind of bend that down nice and sharp so it meets this edge. And then I'm using tape and really adhering it here and then bringing it over with a good bit of tension to really make sure it keeps those two edges together nice and tightly. Okay, at this point, before I close this up, I'm going to put in one of these supports that came with this system. And then these green ones kind of go over. So there's a little bit of finagling here to kind of wiggle and get that under over there. So really quick, throw some water on my edges and then close this up. And I'm starting with the red here again. Really pulling it with some tension. And then at this point, I'm going to go ahead and also tape down the green. If I haven't already this one I kind of caught on the back end there. You're just wanting to use tape to really make sure that this plastic support is getting pulled tightly and is going to form your clay nice and crisply. Looks kind of goofy, but that'll do the job very nicely. And at this point, I'm going to take it off to the hot plate to dry. And this is one of the points where you could get a little impatient and cause some problems for yourself. At least I did a couple of times. You want to leave it set to dry and, either work on the embellishments, find something else to do, and really give it time and have some patience. You should kind of see that you should be able to see the moisture kind of evaporating out against the plastic. And at that point, you can open it up and kind of open up the tape a little bit and flex the plastic a little bit to see if it's releasing and kind of let it ventilate and dry a little bit more that way. But you really want to take your time and allow this to dry, because if you try to open it up too soon, it'll peel away with the plastic and you'll have a lot of kind of patchwork to do to fill. So just be patient and let this dry. While I'm waiting on that to dry, I'm going to create some of the decorative elements for this piece. And I'm going to be using these die cutting tools. And for this one, you're supposed to use the 3 cards thickness frame to create the slab to cut them from, and it tells you that with a little red bar there. So I'm rolling some clay to 3 cards thickness. And then since I'm using these tools to cut, you want to be cutting on a nice hard surface to have something to push against. So I'm going to be cutting on a tile. And with Phoenix, I'm just using Cool Slip on this die head. And then for these, you just push down, and I kind of rock and rotate a little bit to make sure I'm cutting all the way to my edge. And then cut out as many as you need. For the body of this pendant, I need 8. Let's see if I can make them fit. Cutting it close. And then at this point, kind of peel away the excess. So now these are ready to go dry on the hot plate as well. Now I'm going to make some dot elements as well, and I've got my round dome finishing touches mold for that. And today I'm actually using a tissue blade alongside this. In the past I've used either a mini palette knife or a clay scraper, but the stiffness of the tissue blade is actually really helpful with the more firm clay that I'm using today. And Phoenix, because it is more dense, it doesn't go in as easily. So it's a little bit more of a process, and I'm really pushing down with this tissue blade. And that's again where the firmness of the tissue blade is helpful. And then the sharp edge on it is also helpful as well, because the Phoenix wants to stick to itself a little bit more and kind of peel out. So for removing clay, with this, I'll kind of take the cutting edge and drag away. And I'm kind of doing middle out to clear this clay, because again, if I were to just drag it across like I'm accustomed to, since this clay is a little more sticky and more dense, it would want to peel the previous ones out like that guy did, but I'm just going to settle him in that one instead. So then at this point, to get a smooth surface on the back there, I'll just take a damp finger. Lost one there. Take a damp finger and really smooth that out, and then do one final sweep. So I'm going to repeat that on the smaller ones and make some dots to work with. At this point, I'm going to take these off to dry. And while I was dropping that off, I noticed that there's kind of that moisture that I was talking about that you'll see start to try to escape and kind of accumulate around the edges. So at this point, I'm going to remove a little bit of my tape to try to kind of ventilate this form a little bit and allow that moisture to escape for this to continue to dry. And I'm not going to pull away from the clay at this point. I'm just going to kind of open up my overlapping red edge there. And then we'll go back to the heat to continue to dry. While that form continues to dry, looks like these are ready to clean up a little bit. And you could use sanding pads for this, but another option is just to use your tissue blade to kind of knock off any edges from where you might not have pressed down the die tool completely. But it's just a quick way that you can clean up that edge and just get them ready to go for applying to that form once it is dry. It's pretty quick cleanup. And I'm just going to keep doing that to all 8 of the elements that I'm going to be applying to my sides. So my little form here is finally looking dry, and it should easily pop and release when it is ready to go. So the first thing I always do is I kind of take a look and see where there are gaps that I'm going to want to fill. And for that, I'm going to be using clay alongside one of these foam healing tools. And I'm going to kind of press the clay on it first and then use this nice broad flat surface that corresponds really nicely with the surfaces of my shape here to smooth it out and really kind of seamlessly blend my added clay. So I'm kind of just starting off and making a really thin coil. Then I'm like, okay, that should be able to kind of stretch and fill there a little bit. And then you can use a brush, a finger, whatever, to really quickly kind of rehydrate the spots where you're anticipating adding material. And I'm just gonna grab my coil and kind of really press in, and then kind of use my finger to pinch and drag off any excess. So that's looking kind of rough, but that's where this is going to come into play. I'm just going to get it damp. And then these tools work really well for this type of thing because it not only smooths out and kind of blends any added clay, but it softens the clay around it a little bit to help receive that clay. So I'm working in a circular motion here to kind of buff out and blend out the clay that I just added. And you don't want to overdo this because you can also always use a sanding stick to kind of crispen things up and remove it. But already I can tell that that's going to be a really subtle fix, and you're not really going to be able to tell you how to do a patch there. So I'm going to move on to this one up here. Grab a little bit of clay left from that first go. Might have to get some more. Oops. And again, push down and in to start. And then come in with that foam tool. To smooth things out. And I'm just going to repeat that process on this kind of gap here and over here. So at this point, it might look a little sloppy, but your faces should be overall even and your edges should be filled. And we're going to allow it to completely dry before doing a little bit more shaping with the sanding stick. While that's drying, I'm going to take the opportunity to work on my bail. So for my bail, since I'm forming it around a curved shape, I'm not going to be able to use the dried pieces that I already made to embellish my form. So I'm going to start off by cutting some more of the Nova star shapes. So again, rolling to 3 cards thickness, and I just need 2. Set that aside, and I'm going to roll out a sheet of clay, still at 3 cards thickness. And I kind of used that star shape to design the form of my bail here, and also use these little finishing touches up top there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of my finishing touches and start by positioning those. So I'm wetting everything at this point. And I'm bringing out a little bit of paste as well. So I need 1 medium, and then I have 3 small, on either side as well. So I'm going to need 6 small. And I could just flip this mold out and dump them out, but when I'm kind of just using a couple, sometimes I'll just leave them in the mold and pull them out as needed instead of chasing them around my work surface. All right. So you can see my clay is kind of soaked in that moisture, so I'm going to add a little more again. And then when I'm working with paste, sometimes I'll just go in and pick up some and then spread it on my tough card so I can just dip in place. And I'm doing this, sometimes it'd be okay to use just water to apply a really small element like this, but since I'm going to be bending my clay to a round form at the top there, I really want to make sure that this is well applied so it won't pop off while I'm trying to make that bend. So then I'm going to add my smaller elements on the side here, and then I'll be adding my die cut forms over there. So again, I'm just coming over and dipping in the paste and placing. That way these will be super securely connected since I'm going to be bending my clay. All right, I've got these all generally where I want them. I'm going to nudge them a bit with my tweezers, and then when I'm happy with it, just go ahead and come in with water over everything. I'm going to re-dampen the spot over here, and then grab my elements from the die cut. And the edges on this are kind of torn, but I'm going to use a brush and clean that up really quickly. So at this point, since this is soft, I'm just going to come in with some paste. And I'm positioning it up against those dots that I placed. And there is a little bit of a pressure to be quick here, just because as this base is drying out, it's going to be a little bit less flexible. So I'm trying to work quickly. And then again, water to clean up not only that cut edge some, but also smooth out any paste that might have come out on the side and just re-adhere everything. At this point, I'm going to cut my edge for my bail just by following the die and then kind of coming in here where my dot meets the die cut. And I like working with Phoenix or something like this, especially, you just saw me there, I was able to put my finger on top there, and I'm not really worried about denting or distorting my clay because it's dried enough that it's nice and firm there. Clear out that excess. And then at this point, you want to pick something to form around. I've just got my trusty disposable applicator there, something I often use. If it looks like your clay is sticking a little bit here because you've gotten it dampened, and that kind of sometimes can lead it to stick to the surfaces it was wetted on, you can use your tissue scraper to help relieve it, or your tissue blade rather, sorry. And then before I even put this under, I'm going to kind of put a little pressure on the top of my die element here and kind of coax it round, because these are more dry than the base since we started out making them. So I want to kind of pre-nudge them into agreeing with that form. So I put a little bit of a round shape there as well. I'm going to flip it over, grab some paste, and put it there at my tip. Place that in, and bring my ends together. I'm going to pinch for a little bit to make sure it's going to stay in place, and then take this off to dry around whatever round mound roll it is that you picked. So at this point, I like to come in with my sanding stick and just kind of in one direction push and even out anything that I might need to. Like if I left a little excess anywhere. But you want to make sure that you don't overdo it at this point and sand through the material at your corners and open anything up. But this is a nice rigid tool, and it's going to help you keep your corners nice and sharp. Again, I'm just taking down any high areas before I move on to the sanding pads. But before I even do that, I'm going to drill my hole. And I'm drilling a hole at both the top and the bottom. And I'm doing that now before I do all my sanding in case if you were to have a little bit chip off or something that you needed to repair, you might as well repair it and then sand everything to a nice surface. But let's just fingers crossed that doesn't happen. But if it does, it's easier to add clay and then clean it up after the fact. So I've got my little it's a pin vise, a little hand drill here, and it came with some drill sets, and I'm starting off with just a smaller hole to create my pilot hole, and then I'm going to move on to drilling with a number 54 drill bit that's going to end up accommodating, after it's shrunk, an 18 gauge wire. So I've got a really nice point here, and it formed really well, but it's hard to drill a hole into a point. So I'm going to flatten that out a little bit with my sanding stick to give myself a nice flat surface to be drilling into. So otherwise your drill bit's going to want to kind of skid and slide if you don't have a flat face to be drilling onto. I'm going to repeat that on both sides. And then I'm starting with the smaller. And I'm just gently twisting and applying a little bit of downward pressure. And I'm also drilling through the paper, the support that's inside my form here. I want to drill through that as well, just because I always like to send a drill bit all the way through my piece, or a piece of wire all the way through my piece, to make sure my holes are lined up and everything's going to go smoothly once it's fired. So the smaller on both sides. So now at this point I'm tightening up my hand drill here around just a single bit, and using that initial hole to drill my larger hole. And I'm just gently twisting and pushing down, really not allowing myself to apply a lot of pressure, and just being nice and patient. There it goes through the paper. And repeating that to the other side. So I had a little bit of varying wall thickness on my faces here, and one side kind of wasn't thick enough and it kind of chipped down a little bit as I drilled. And you could fill that and bring the wall back up, or it's really not going to make that big of a visual difference because it's going to be meeting the bail there anyways. You can just take your point down and shorten your piece a little bit here. And that's going to be just fine. So at this point, before I start embellishing, because it's easier to make this face look nice and even and then add the embellishments instead of adding the embellishments and trying to sand up to them, I'm going to go ahead and use my sanding pads. And for a really broad face like this, instead of holding it and sanding, I'll place my sanding pad down on my work surface and just hit it with a circular motion with some downward pressure. And again, you don't want to overdo it, especially with the superfine. But just really quickly looking for high areas and sanding them down on those surfaces that you already hit with your medium sanding stick and created scratches. Then I'm going to move on to my ultrafine before adding my embellishments. So I've sanded my faces and I'm now ready to start embellishing them. So I'm going to bring back my little die cut elements and my dots. And then I'm going to be using paste alongside this little silicone clay shaper and a brush. And for this, I like to start off by applying all of these forms to all of my faces, and then I'm going to do the dots. For the dots, I don't know if you can see, I did alternating, kind of these ones are a little bit higher, and then these ones are a little bit lower, these ones are a little bit higher. Just as kind of a preference, when you spin, it kind of moves a little bit. But if you wanted, you could do each face symmetrically. It's entirely up to you. But I'm going to start off by dampening the faces. And because I smoothed this to such a high finish, it almost kind of burnished that surface and kind of closed it up a little bit. So you really want to take your time rehydrating. And then I'm also going to be using paste to add some material to that connection. All right. Start off with this one. And another reason I'm using paste is these have a very slight curve to them. They're not perfectly flat, and when you're making connections, the more surface contact, the better. So since there isn't full surface contact back here, I'm going to fill with a little paste, and that will provide full surface contact. So I just put my paste on, and then I have my damp brush handy to clean up any that might squish out on my edges. And when I'm happy with my positioning, I'm pressing down, and then I'm going to move on, and again, re-adding some water, because you can see my clay is kind of soaking it up. Some more paste. Pushing down. This one did have a little paste come out on my side there. So I'm just going to smooth it out really quickly. And then I'm going to move on. So I've placed all those larger elements, and I'm ready to add my little dots. And just like before, I'm just going to be dipping them. So I'm going to get some paste on a tough card there. And just applying a bit of water. I'm using tweezers to pick up, dip, and place. And as I pointed out earlier, I kind of did a lower, higher pattern here. Come on, buddy. So I'm happy with this side. I'm gonna quickly use a brush, smooth things out. This guy scooted, so that's my sign that I need to apply a little more pressure. And then again, I'm gonna move on and repeat this process to all my faces. At this point, I'm going to take this off to dry, and then I'm going to spend time cleaning up my bale and drilling a hole in it. So just like before, I've got kind of a point here that I'm going to flatten out before I start drilling. Because it's easier to drill a flat face. I'm going to switch back to my smaller drill bit to start. I'm just gently drilling through. And then once I've got my hole drilled, I'm going to add some paste to fill any low areas and do any sanding that I need to. But there's my pilot hole. And then come in with the same larger drill bit from before. Just again, gentle downward pressure for this. I'm just going to keep drilling until I go all the way through my material there. Then you can see here there's some gap, so I'm going to go ahead and fill that with some paste and allow that to dry. And then I'm just going to use my sanding pads to clean up and kind of give a final sand on all my surfaces here. And I'm just going to finish this piece off with a final sanding of microfine. I'm just hitting the high areas and kind of coming in along any places where there might have been some paste that was evened out. But just a really quick once over with the microfine. And that'll give you a really nice finish once your piece is fired. Since these pieces are dimensional, you're going to want to fire them with support. I fired my pieces in a silica dish with alumina hydrate. There's a range of firing options that you can choose to fire from, but I fired at 1650 for 2 hours for maximum sintering. Here's what you need for the soldering portion of this project. Today I'm working with a double third hand soldering station, and it's just really convenient because it has all these articulated joints that you can really position and place things exactly how you'd like them for soldering. I've got some easy solder, wire cutters, tweezers, a brush for applying my flux, and then a wire that fits in the hole in my piece. I have some flux, a butane torch, and then a mask, safety glasses, and a fume extractor. Please also remember to pull back any hair and have tight sleeves and be working in a fireproof environment for this step of the project. I'm going to start off by balling up one end of my wire, and to start that off I'm just going to dip the end in some flux, and especially if you're working with a metal that's going to oxidize, dipping it in flux will prevent that from happening and allow it to ball up nicely. Another little tip is for balling up your wire, having reflective heat can be helpful, so placing like a soldering brick or something behind your wire. I'm not going to be able to do that because then you guys wouldn't be able to see anything, but using reflected heat will help this happen faster. It's just going to take a little bit longer for me. But I'm basically just going to be heating the bottom portion of my wire here and looking for it to rise up and ball. So again, this might kind of take me a minute because I'm not working with reflective heat, and you can kind of see it started to go there a little bit. And that'll be a nice little ball. I usually quench and then slide it in and see how it's fitting, and you can always take it back and re-ball it if your ball isn't large enough yet. But I think that'll be just fine. I'm gonna go quench this, and then we're just gonna try it on for size. See how it's sitting nicely, and I think that'll do. I think that looks really nice. So now I need to trim it, and for that I just want to make sure that there's a little bit of wire between my pendant and my bail, because if they're right against each other, all that surface contact is going to actually prevent it from spinning as smoothly as it potentially could. So I just kind of take it in from the side there and kind of eyeball it. And then a Sharpie, a scribe, whatever you have handy to to kind of make a mark, and I'll usually cut above and then put it in, check, and see if I need to cut again. That's kind of a general, see how it's going to fit spot. And that should be good. I'm looking for it to be able to go into that hole and either slightly above or just flush to the edge of my bail there. So that's going to work out fine. Now this is where this stand really comes in handy, because I'm going to have one of the arms holding my pendant and keeping it in place and upright, and then the other arm is going to hold my bail in place. So I'm going to come down low and off to the side with this one. And these have so many joints in them that they're really, really readily positionable and really convenient for this type of thing. Before I place it into my third hand there, I'm going to apply some flux. And then there will be enough on my bail that it will apply to that wire as I slide it in. And positioning it like that. Scoot it down a little bit more. And that should be perfect. So at this point, I'm going to heat my flux a little bit until it's clear and tacky. And then I'm going to use some tweezers to apply my solder chip. So now I'm just going to go in and place a couple of chips of solder. And my goal is to be placing them on the connection point between my wire and my bail. Once my solder is in position, I'm ready to heat it until I see my solder flash and flow. When I'm heating my piece, I'm going to make sure that I'm focusing my heat up here on my bail and not the pendant itself, because I don't want to accidentally draw my solder down and solder the wire to the pendant, because then it won't spin. So I'm just going to focus my heat up here on my bail and where the bail meets the wire. So I'm starting my heat up high and heating my bail, and then kind of coming down and bringing it lower, closer to the wire. My solder just flashed, so now I'm taking my heat off, and I'm actually going to allow this to cool. I could quench it, but it would fill with water, and then I'd have to kind of shake it around and drain it, or you could torch it to drain it, but it's just easier to just wait for it to cool. So my pendant has cooled, and now I'm ready to work on finishing. I didn't want to place this piece in the pickle because, again, it would fill with liquid, and then you'd have to deal with kind of shaking out the pickle. So for cleaning up these pieces, I just use the 3M radial bristle brushes on a flex shaft. And then you're ready to finish your pieces however you would like. I decided to add some black max to make the low areas contrast against the high areas, and then tumbled this piece to a high polish. Wanaree Tanner's hollow form system comes in lots of different shapes, so I decided I would test out this project in another shape as well. And then I finished this one with some bees from a Finishing Touches mold. But I think you can see just here between these two that there are so many different ways that you could use her hollow form system alongside any embellishment of your choice and make lots of different spinning pendants. Thanks for watching.